This week, we're joined by Dan Smaida. Dan has spent his entire career coaching and training financial professionals on consultative skills. He was a speaker at Barnum's kickoff meeting where he shared strategies to avoid cognitive traps that advisors fall into. He's here to share all those strategies with us today. I'm Paul Blanco, and this is Small Steps, Big Wins. All right, Dan, welcome to Small Steps, Big Wins. I'm so excited to have you on the show today. And after hearing you speak, I believe at our kickoff meeting, and then at you did some breakouts for our guys. I'm really excited to have you on. And I think the timing of all the stuff you're doing is amazing right now. So thank you again for being on the show today.
Well, thank you. I'm in elite company, having listened to a bunch of episodes. You've got some real good guests. So thanks for inviting me on.
No, you got it. Let's first start with how did you find yourself doing what you're doing right now? Like, how did you get here?
Ooh, it's a long story I'll make real quick. I was in college at the University of Minnesota as the sales manager for the Minnesota Daily, online student newspaper in the physical newspaper days. 12 kids working part-time for me. We didn't have a process. Some kid was working for me, knew a sales trainer, and we had him in. And I can tell you where I was and what time of day it was. We were in the middle of the afternoon of this day-long sales training session. And I looked at this guy, and he's got a book and he's got a business and he's doing what he wants. And I said, I want to do that. And ever since that moment, I've pursued exactly that. And so I'm doing the job I realized I wanted to do when I was still in college, still today. And that was like last century.
I love it. Well, congratulations on knowing that, because not a lot of people do that early career. And I love that you followed your journey. So digging right in, like the consultative process, what's the effectiveness for advisors and how does it work and what is it? And what's really, when I say the timing is right, most advisors, I've been saying this on the show for the last year and a half that COVID had so many bad things, but so many good things came out of it in the business sense. And it's literally we just came up on the 5-year anniversary of it. And now people are selling virtual way more. I would say that it was probably 15%, prior to COVID. And now it's probably 70, 80%, some 90. So I think what you're doing is even more important now because people transition to a different way of selling. So why don't you walk us through it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really have become a specialist, especially when I work with advisors, or so many people know about advising and the technical part of that. But what's underrated is your ability to actualize your expertise through the consultative process. And it's really what we want from anybody who's paid to help us, be they a doctor, counselor, therapist, and so on. Someone who's able to truly diagnose before they prescribe. Just getting that sequence right. Discover before you deliver in advising, right? What are the important things and how do you give them the important things they need? That's your ability to achieve a process that helps clients feel like it really is working for them. It's personalized, is way harder than it looks. It's one of those things that everybody thinks they're good at. Oh, I got the trilogy questions. I'm going to work a couple in. But what you do with the answers and whether you turn that into meaningful insight and change, et cetera, it's a whole other story. So that's what I work on with people. And especially when you're online, the opportunity to do that is different and evolving now.
So give me a couple of the main tips that you would teach right away to someone. Like, I understand the concept and it makes a lot of sense. I was just telling an advisor yesterday that, don't be afraid to say, well, here's your couple of options, but this is what I think is right for you today, because they're looking for that, the client. But I want to understand more of what should they be doing differently today? If I'm listening right now, should they pull over and write this one down?
Okay, I'll give you a couple. I'll give you a few actually that correspond with the meeting process. We can talk about before and after, but let's just focus on client meetings and what the few most important things are that you could do right now to make your meetings better.
Go ahead.
Right. One would be to start with the client's agenda, not your agenda or their reaction to your agenda. If you go to a good counselor, they'll find out what you're there for, and then they'll weave in what they think you should be talking about.
Fair.
In the discovery phase, it's really being able to close the loop on your listening. Right? Your folks do a lot of online meetings. And the opportunity there is visual listening, where clients can see that you're really picking up what they are putting down because you've put it down, and now you're showing it to them, and we can clarify and build on that. And you're actually creating room to ask those deeper follow-up questions that get from facts to needs. But visual listening closes the loop on what they're telling you and what you're hearing.
So what does visual listening mean exactly? Give me more context on that.
Yeah. So we're on an audio podcast, which makes it a little bit ironic to be saying this, but it's not, because even here you can picture a client and an advisor talking on screen, face to face, camera to camera. And as the advisor is asking the questions and the client's talking, the advisor's taking notes behind the scene in the medium of their choice, be it Remarkable, Word, Notes, PowerPoint. And then at a strategic point of the conversation where as the advisor asks the follow-up questions, and I've gotten the real, right, what do you feel like you need there or are looking for? And, we're at that point where I feel like they're telling me what they need to tell me. It's time to pause and say, can I share my screen with you? And a couple notes I've jotted down. They won't be perfect because I've been in the conversation. And then you share your screen. You just pause. Give the client a chance to read that and look at and replay what they just told you. And then you start talking about what they just told you, using that as the one text, if you will, or joint understanding of what's going on. And not just the clarity that comes from that, the alignment that comes from that, and the feeling heard because you can see yourself being heard. I've done that since online meetings were a thing. I was an early adopter of WebEx. I pioneered and piloted Adobe Connect, and I've seen it happen over and over again. The switch that flips when people really see the listening and they see they've been heard.
I love it. I'll be using that a lot, visual listening. So I love that one. Now at least I know what it means. So good. What's another one?
I think let's apply the same idea to one of the hardest parts for advisors, especially developing advisors, and that's ending a meeting with mutual commitment to action. It's actually going to happen. You can call it closing. A lot of advisors don't like to call it that, but are we really generating, giving and getting commitments to action that are going to happen? They move opportunities and the relationship forward. Everybody who's been in this business for any length of time has heard clients say they will do something, and then the client doesn't do it. That's always going to happen, but you increase the likelihood that a commitment will happen when you apply visual commitment techniques. So picture this. It's the end of the meeting, and you say, what do you want? We talked about a lot of things. You summarize, where do you want to take this? The client says, I want to do this. Okay. So let's talk about the steps there, right? I'm going to do this. How about on your end? Great. What's your timing, right? When can this work for you? Great. And as you establish all that, as the advisor, again, you're taking a note. And at a certain point, you want to pop that up on the screen and say, okay, here's what I'm catching right now. Are we aligned on what you want to have happen here, what's going to work for you? And you just apply the same principles again. You clarify, you ask follow-up questions. And now what you're triggering is commitment and consistency. I love Cialdini's The Psychology of Influence. He talks about commitment and consistency and how people generally are wired to want to do what they said they would do. And because we're visual listeners, seeing what I just said, more impactful. It's why IOUs were invented, is to make verbal commitments visual and tangible. Same thing applies here when you're talking about online meetings. Visual commitments mean more durable commitments.
I love that. Now, do you teach after that? Is there a follow-up note that goes out that you would teach advisors to do, or are you really just specializing in this part of the meeting?
A really good question. You're using Zoom AI, correct, to capture online meetings? Yeah. So if I've done my job as an advisor and I've created this dialogue in the meeting, I'm going to have notes that I can cut and paste and use in my follow-up. Also, the screen that I've used to create visual notes for the meeting itself becomes a cut and paste into the follow-up. It's essential to be able to do it once and multi-purpose that listening and those commitments. So those become feed for the follow-up.
Love it. I love it. I really love that. And those are two great tips. So you also talk about the cognitive traps that advisors find themselves getting into. And let's start with a veteran advisor first. Like, what are some of the traps that they fall into that you really help them get out of or, change?
Yeah, that's I love that you started with veteran advisors, because the trap of experience is a serious one. Developing advisors, when you say, hey, you got to listen more and ask good questions, they're like, yes, I do, because I barely know anything and I'm here to learn. Right. But at some point, hey man, it's happened to me. The switch flips a little bit and you start to fall into assumptive traps. Like, oh yes, I've seen 100 clients like this before, right? I know exactly what they need. And you start thinking ahead to how you're going to help them manage taxes or what, their insurance situation could be. And I'm taking my eye and my ears way off the listening there. So side note, have I dropped my book on you yet?
No, but I was going to ask about that in a minute, but go ahead, give it to me.
But my fault. I should have before this. In my book, The Psychology of Advice, I talk about 8 traps that limit your effectiveness as an advisor and a consultant. And the first one is simply assuming you understand. The second one is assuming the need for advice. And this is sort of a life skill, isn't it? How many times has somebody in your life come to you with a complaint or a problem, but they didn't want your advice on solving it?
A lot.
Yeah. Oh, yes. In all of my relationships, right, this probably happened. Whether I've realized it or not is another thing, because our tendency is to assume that need. And the more experienced you are, right, the more that happens. I mean, that even goes through all the way through, right, mistaking confusion for agreement. Any advisor who's ever asked something like, does that make sense? Probably hasn't gotten enough data back because of the way they're asking the question. Clients, to save face, will say, yeah, but they're actually confused. So it's really around how you do what you do how you apply the consultative process to stay out of some of these traps. It's how you ask the questions, is what questions you're asking and what you're doing with the answers.
I agree. So what is a common one that they do? They just don't listen enough and don't follow through and ask confusing. They get the client more confused and don't qualify that more.
Yeah, I think those are all happening. Here's an underrated one. It's that's not happening. It's really quantifying and qualifying the client's understanding of what you're telling them. Right? Alternatives to does that make sense, and really being persistent in digging into where clients need to be more clear. This is a big trap for veteran advisors, because I've watched you work. I coach veteran advisors on these skills. And once you've been working with these concepts and these tools for long enough, you start unconsciously talking at a higher level and sort of a shorthand level about them. The acronyms and the jargon start to slip in, right? It goes a little faster, right? The explanation gets a little shorter and faster and doesn't necessarily work for everyone like your previous versions did because they're more clear. So that's a trap for experienced consultants for sure.
Got it. So now help me on the younger advisors. I mean, a lot of newer advisors are coming in the business today. We're bringing in a ton of, advisors off the campus. They're working with a lot of veteran advisors to grow and get mentored, but they're doing a lot of the front level work and maybe even the first and second meeting before it goes there. So what are some of the common traps they fall into?
Yeah. Talk about your first meeting for a moment that a newer advisor might have with a prospective client. What's the best possible outcome of that meeting?
Probably getting them to agree to a meeting with a veteran advisor could be one, or it could be taking care of making a meeting to take care of some sort of problem they have, immediate problem they might have to do next.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And what would you say the major obstacle is to the newer advisor in that? Let's take the first situation where it's a first meeting you're trying to turn into a second meeting. I mean, they're coming to you for help, as far as I understand it. What's the rub?
I think they have to do a better job I think the opportunity is to sell the veteran advisor skill sets and get them to that meeting and not get caught up in going too far past that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So I think that dovetails with what I see from newer advisors. It's easy to say, I want this to happen, but what's the strategy for getting the client to have the insight that needs to happen? I need to meet with a senior advisor and dig more into this. Is an insight that you want the client to have, not something you as the newer advisor want to push on them.
Yeah.
Right now I'm salesy. Right now I'm falling on the wrong side of similarity bias. Right, I'm the hyena trying to chase the zebra down.
Yep.
So newer advisors have to have a strategy and a set of questions that'll help clients have the insight that, yeah, it would be valuable to talk with a senior advisor more deeply about the issue we've been discussing.
Yeah, I love that. And just lead them that way, and then go back to your visual check-in and visual close.
Yep. The most powerful words on my notes are when I can quote the client saying need to or want to or looking for.
Love that. Love that. That's a good tip right there. So one of the questions before I jump to another subject is when you train advisors and you're teaching these skill sets, how do advisors put these to actual work? Is it you're teaching them the language, or is it just trial and error? Like how do you help them to execute on this?
It's a really good question. And it's an important one too, because you're feeding in this podcast a lot of opportunities for advisors to get better. I noticed you had Bill Cates on, right, with the language of referrals and introductions, a guy I know. Now I've got the language, right? So I'm going to go use that. Right? I've got a couple of Chris Brady's trilogy questions. Also another great resource, advisors, Chris Brady and the Pack Life team are how I got to you. And please listen to that episode again too, right? It's a really good one.
Thank you.
So I work a couple of those questions in. But how'd I do? Right? How often do advisors go back and look at the tape and really examine the transcript in the Zoom AI for how did that question come out of my mouth? And what did I do with the answer? And did I get to an actual need or an insight from the client? That's the opportunity, right? It's the transcript and the game tape to self-evaluate and to get better. It's how pros in all the disciplines do it now.
I appreciate that. And I don't think that happens a lot. And I remember, it's my old football days, but I remember playing on Saturday in high school and then doing something stupid and know that on Monday night when we watched the films, the coach is going to address it with me. And I've always been a good person to critique myself after the podcast, after a meeting when I did joint field work. So I think it's really critical, but I don't think it's happening as much. When you say that to an advisor, they'll say, I'm so busy. I don't even have time to do this. I can't go back and check it.
Right. And what they're probably not saying is that it's painful. Right. It's painful and it's hard to do. It's one of those quadrant 2 important but not urgent things. It's easy to set aside.
Fair point.
Right. Absolutely. So, what I do when I coach advisors now and train advisors is I do what pro sports teams do today is we practice and scrimmage and we tape the practices and we look at the practice tape. So we can make our mistakes in practice and get better before we hit the game. Wow. So, right, simulated meetings with simulated clients where we're looking at the tape and the transcript and really helping people hone that consultative process. It's what pro football, base, et cetera, teams do. They tape practice now and they coach to it.
I love your language. And what you're really talking about is role play, correct?
Oh, yes. Can we say the R word here?
Yeah. I was like, it sounds pretty sophisticated, but it sounds like role play to me.
Role play with a practice partner, tape it, look at it.
I love it.
Get better.
It's the best.
Yeah, you don't need me to do that, right? You don't need me.
Back to basics in 25, but you're right. Zoom AI is the greatest gift. And that's just another thing that came out of COVID that, someone would have someone scribing in the meeting or you're taking the notes and maybe not doing it as good as you can. And now you have a tool that if you're not using it, guys, please start using it.
Oh, yeah. One quick thing on that. Here's the next frontier. You've got a Zoom transcript now, right? Put it into your AI engine with a custom prompt that evaluates it based on your best practices and your sales process. And now the machine actually provides the feedback that both an advisor and a manager can use to help that advisor get better.
I agree. And I know many advisors are doing that already. So that's really good stuff. Mm-hmm. All right. The word visual for me is an important one. And I want to go off a little bit on that for a second. I know many of my advisors that I've watched and coached and in the industry, the best I've seen, even through all the meetings I've went through in the 30 plus years I'm doing this, was someone was up on an easel or on a board drawing. And, I'm calling it, for lack of a better name, Zoom face to face, right? And many advisors got rushed into this, it hit all of a sudden. I'm doing my meetings on Zoom and they're having conversations like you and I are. You're showing visual commitment, but they're not doing the visual learning that they used to do. And the simplest one is many advisors probably have a bucket strategy, tax control triangle, any of those different things that they drew. And that was engaging to the client. So what's your feeling on the visual part of Zoom now?
Oh, it's so great. It's a way better opportunity now than your legal pad ever was.
Fair.
For instance, a lot of your clients have a big giant legal pad staring them in the face when you're on a Zoom with them. And you can, right, just what you draw is going to be more legible and clear because the surface area is bigger. True. You can't wave your legal pad 8 inches from their nose, right, in a real meeting. Secondly, allows you as an advisor to be way more professional with what you use as a visual. For example, your task control triangle. You don't need to draw a triangle. You can start with a real triangle and make your notes on that. You could take that even further to build a little bit of a Prezi or a PowerPoint that did the drawing for you. Right? When I use my PowerPoint, I draw on a screen and I'll animate that as a replay. And if I'm in a slideshow, for example, it'll draw it for me. But start with a template, even better now than just freehanding it or freestyling on your Remarkable.
So is it really what you're teaching, if I'm hearing you, making this up, but I have 10 because I like to dummy things down, as you can see from listening to me on these shows. But if I have 10 tax control trial type of things, I'm getting those done professionally in my PowerPoint or wherever I'm using. I'm popping that up on the screen and then I'm adding to that. And
Yes.
is that what you're teaching to advisors?
That's exactly what I'm teaching to advisors. And I think there are all for advisors that want to just do it themselves. And you can. I have a set of basic visual techniques that you'll just want to use as an advisor. Things like the XY chart and the 4-box, et cetera. Just simple, the Venn diagram, underutilized as a way of helping clients see things. The T chart, again, underrated, but totally useful when you're trying to get clients to compare options side by side.
Yeah. And once again, I think going back to the tape and role playing and do you, when you said that, I like what you said earlier, when you said you use the example of the remarkable, you're taking your notes and these are the 7 things that you told me that are important to you and you're showing that to them. And then you're including that in your recap notes to say, are you cleaning it up or are you doing it in the written form like you sent it?
It's a good question. The more it can reflect the actual notes from the meeting, the better. But it needs to be also professional. So
Okay.
I definitely say to advisors, what do you want your brand to be? And hopefully it's letter perfect. So I default to just making sure everything is spelled super correctly, spelled out, which makes it, if you're going to use a remarkable and you don't want to be in double entry, turn that into text that you can modify or start by typing. Right? You may be in for certain things like their needs and next steps. You may be in typing land on a screen versus handwriting land to begin with.
Fair. I know that I wouldn't be able to do that because I'm a terrible typer, but yes, I understand what you're saying. So when you back to the visual stuff, are you training advisors in, meeting 1 or meeting 2? Is there a certain time when they're getting, or if they're just trying to make a point, they know they have their 10 things that they have that they're going to pop on their screen? Like, how are you training with that?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Sorry about that.
So you have your opening meeting where you're engaging them and you're getting, your visual learning up there for them. But is it meeting 2 where you start then when you're going into what you're recommending? Is that when you're starting to use all your visual pieces to make your points and to bring home what you're saying?
Good question. I coach advisors that every meeting that they have should have a core set of visuals of the top few screens, if you will. The first screen is an agenda that reflects the topics the client prioritizes in the order they prioritize them, or it's going to work best. So agenda. Second is notes on their needs, right? Absolutely. You've got to have a screen in every meeting for taking notes and needs. And then thirdly, commitments.
It's awesome.
What next steps? Every meeting, right, should, if it's a business meeting, result in somebody doing something. And even if it's just you doing all the things, now you're showing them your service.
It's fair. Now, I guess as we come to a close here, we had a lot of stuff really quick here. Tell us more about the book, though. Give me that first.
Yes, thank you. The Psychology of Advice is written by me, but I didn't make this stuff up. I just use I help people apply basic and fundamental behavioral psychology. So I go through the major biases that affect decision-making, and especially important in finance. I give a set of traps to avoid. I focus on some key skills that consultative advisors need. And I then actually give you a couple of plays and visual strategies that'll help you do things like explore a problem, right? Discuss options, compare options, generate commitments. So it's a workbook in a book, though. It's not a story. And unfortunately for listeners, it's totally not an audiobook. I recorded the audiobook, but nobody wants to hear me saying pictures, right? Picture this for 2 hours. Just not. So it's a physical book. Amazon has it.
I usually convert books into workbooks anyway, so I like that you said that. I'm a breeze and quick and jump around a lot, so I'm glad to hear that. Last question to end the podcast, and thank you so much for being on again, Dan. I really appreciate it. And so many great tips here. There's one after another. What do you find when you're working with advisors that stops them from executing some of this consultative selling? Is it that they get stuck or they're not comfortable? They don't want to do the tape. What is it? Or what is it that makes them move faster?
I think it actually starts at the start with awareness. I think that the Dunning-Kruger effect is where people that suck at something overrate their ability at that very thing, right? The worse you are at something, if you know a little bit about it, you think you know way more than you do. This is one of those things. It's easy to say, I ask good questions and I ask a lot of questions. It's also easy to overrate your skill at doing that. And that's why I so strongly urge introspection and reflection using transcripts and game tape and practice tape, is because you've got to really become aware of your own level of consultative skill and how is it really working before you can do anything.
Well, it's interesting as you're saying that. I try to approach every meeting with, I want to be at my best. I want to perform at my best. I'm going to make sure I prep the most I possibly could. And I think for advisors, I know many of them are doing 25, 30, 40 meetings sometimes in a week. But if they took that approach and analyzed it and got really better, they would probably grow their business 20, 30, 40% just from that. Nothing new. They're already in front of the people. So I think it's really exciting. And thank you for that tip. And, it sounds basic, but I don't think a lot of people in our industry have done that and analyzed their own work like some of the other things and sports that you've used.
Basic implies a base. Right. And we all need that base of consultative skill in order to be effective with the finance part.
Yeah, it's great. So, well, Dan, thank you again. And small steps, big wins. I mean, listen, everybody, take some small steps here. I promise you'll get huge wins here, not even big ones, huge ones. Look for our show on Spotify and Apple. Rate us, share it, please. There's a lot of great content there. And then go pick up Dan's book, The Psychology of Advice. Thank you, Dan, for being on the show. I appreciate what you're doing. And, at Barnum, we're really big on the, impact as many clients as possible. And you're doing that in spades because you're teaching advisors and then they're going out and impacting clients. So I can't thank you enough for what you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks to your team too. They're a joy to work with. Looking forward to more.
Thank you. Have a great day, Dan.
Take care.
Thank you for listening to Small Steps, Big Wins. Please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
All opinions expressed by the program participants are solely their current opinions and do not reflect the opinions their respective parent companies or affiliates or the companies with which the program participants are affiliated. Investments or strategies mentioned in this program may not be suitable for you, and you should make your own independent decision regarding them. This material does not take into account your particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs, and is not intended as recommendations appropriate for you. You should strongly consider seeking advice from your own investment advisor. Securities and investment advisory services offered through qualified registered representatives of MML Investor Services, LLC. Member SIPC, 6 Corporate Drive, Shelton, Connecticut, 06484, telephone number 203-513-6000.